In today's organizations, we can have over 5 generations working together. We need to make sure that we address the communication issues and needs of everybody. My name is Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome to Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. Today, I'm excited to speak with Bob McCann. Bob holds his primary faculty appointment at the UCLA Anderson School of Management, where he is also the director of the Leadership Communication Program, and a secondary appointment at the UCLA Henry Samueli School of Engineering and Applied Science. Bob teaches courses in leadership communication, entrepreneurship, global leadership, and persuasion. Bob is also a consultant and founded the McCann Group. Bob, I'm really excited to have our conversation today.
Thank you. It's really nice of you to invite me.
Excellent.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Excellent. A lot of your research and work focuses on intergenerational interactions in the workplace. Can you give us some context around this issue? Why should we care about generational interactions?
We should care because, for many reasons. First of all, in our current landscape, we have 4, 5, maybe even 6 generations in the workplace at the same time. And so there's a tremendous opportunity for intergenerational engagement, for meeting and interacting with people who are different than you, for increasing a variety of potential outcomes in business in a positive way if we can maximize our intergenerational engagement. So there's many reasons why I think that it's a particularly important topic and a topic that means a lot to me. I mean, my dad is 97 years old and still works 50 hours a week.
Wow.
So I think all of us as researchers, as academics, we need to study something that we care about.
That's amazing, by the way. And certainly we're graduating students all the time who enter the workplace, and they're working with people who've been there for a longer time. What and how do you look at a generation? What is a generation? We have these names for them, but what does it mean?
It's a good question, and there's not necessarily one answer to the question. So
Right.
We can look at a generation as sort of a span of 20 to 30 years. Then there's the more socially constructed generations that demographers might use, or marketers might use, or social scientists, or the media might use, that is often pinned around a specific event in time or series of events that a cohort of individuals, age groups goes through.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the Great Generation, as I mentioned, my father, that
Right.
generation might be tied to World War II, whereas the baby boom generation, a very large one, is more of a demographically based generation.
Okay, so there are lots of ways of categorizing it.
There are.
The bottom line is we
Yes.
have people with lots of different experiences in the workplace at the same time, and those groups or generations tend to have certain characteristics that stand out.
That's right. And I think sometimes maybe we exaggerate or overemphasize the similarities and or differences in a generation. And because they are so big, they're so large, they're so diverse. But on the other hand, it's a handy tool for that. Certainly, when I'm teaching at Anderson or I'm in my consulting firm, people grasp onto that. They want to know about the generation. And I say, why don't we talk about age cohorts? No, we want to know about the generation. So it's a handy tool as well.
Yeah, so I know this academic year is the first year that all of our students, our MBA students, are primarily Gen Z. And people are often asking, do you notice a difference? And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But the point is, we use these names to help categorize.
That's right.
Based on a timestamp. In your work, what are things that leaders and companies can do to help around these generational issues and help their organizations thrive with different generations all present in terms of the values they instill or the programs that they set up? What can they do to help thrive in these circumstances?
So if we start at an organizational level, I think a company would well serve all companies in some sense, regardless of whether they're small, medium, or large, to have age diversity as a part of their DEI efforts. Mm-hmm. So we often talk about gender diversity, and we talk about ethnic diversity and sexual orientation and ability and disability and cognition and so on and so forth. That's wonderful, as we should. However, ageism and age diversity sometimes gets forgotten and dismissed for a variety of reasons, which, if you wish, we could come back to. But I think I would start as an organization there. There are little things organizations can do. They can scan their own website to see if let's just imagine an older worker was looking at the Stanford Business School website. Of course, it's a little different because it is a business school, but scan for images of maybe it would look at a more welcoming place for an older individual if they saw different images on the website. You certainly would want to have anti-bias training in organizations as well at an organizational level, and in some sense, even a greater strategy. We're still at the organizational level for what age might look like and some of the things that we might do in a company to improve a variety of outcomes vis-a-vis age. As you move to the next level, it could be training. We could talk about job ads, for example. We can look what kind of language do we use in our job ads. So if we have ads such as, I'm looking for a vibrant worker to work in a fresh face to work in a fast-paced environment, we have to be careful for ageist code words. And this is something lawyers contact me about all the time. Bob, what are the ageist code words? Because this can also play into age discrimination. So I think that at an organizational level, intergenerational mentoring, where we have reverse age mentoring, is something we see a lot now in the research. Intergenerational team formation is something else we see. More of when we train older workers, a more intentional view on how we do that. We could certainly talk about what that looks like because older workers train differently. These are all sort of at the corporate and leadership level. And then if you wish, we can also, of course, talk about at the individual level what we can do too. But ultimately, I think a lot of the research is quite useful. If we go back 20 years ago, it was the problem of the stereotypes and so on was really being well researched, but the solutions were not. And now we're starting to see a lot of the solutions, which, in my opinion, is really positive.
Absolutely. And underlying everything you shared is this notion that diversity in all types is beneficial to organizations. So not just gender or cultural diversity, but also age diversity is really beneficial. And anything you can do to foster that through mentoring programs, through training programs to help younger workers understand what some of the focus areas of older workers are and vice versa. I'd like to drill down on, you talked about language. Language is obviously part of communication. How do the different groups communicate differently in the workplace? And there are lots of stereotypes, obviously. Can you help us tease out some of the fact from the stereotypes?
Generally speaking, the stereotypes about older people, not necessarily generations, but older people tend to be negative, asexual, impotent, communicatively challenged, frail, slow, mentally struggling. This is what we see in a lot of the stereotype trait literature. Then we have workplace stereotypes, which I think probably speaks more to your question, which in some cases track along with the societal stereotypes. So we have older workers as a stereotype, older workers as struggling with technology or inability to cope with change. Those are two of them. Older workers as being less productive. These are stereotypes now.
Right.
Older workers as being slower on the job. Older workers as being more loyal. Older workers as being more trustworthy. So there are a variety of positive and negative stereotypes that we can see in the organizations. There is the stereotype literature, which is robust, and then there's the communication literature, which looks at what are some of the communication patterns that we see in organizations and outside of organizations that may, in some sense, play along with these stereotypes. So, for example, you may be over-accommodative, you may be under-accommodative, you may dismiss someone communicatively because you view them as an out-group as opposed to an age in-group. So a lot of the communication can track along in that way too. Then, of course, there's age discrimination, which is at what point does language at some point turn into discriminatory language? And that is what I studied years ago. I started looking at age discrimination cases, and we started to bucket out and group different types of language that we found utilized in age discrimination cases, and it tracked very handily with these stereotypes. You could
Sure.
literally bucket them into the out to pasture stereotype that, and so on and so forth. So it's really fascinating how communication and stereotypes, everything here,
Right.
they go together.
Absolutely. And just as you identified some of the stereotypes that younger workers have of older workers absolutely have stereotypes
Yes.
of younger workers as not focused or not knowing or not caring to the same degree. And so it sounds to me like part of what we have to do is be aware that this stereotyping happens. And then it sounds like, based on some of the things you suggested, there are things we can do through communication to help, one, bust those stereotypes, but also help facilitate interaction. And I'd like to drill down a bit more there. Are there things that you know from the literature or your work that can help bring better interaction among the generations in terms of communications and systems?
The key would be quality contact over quantity of contact is
Right.
what we have found. So in an organization, if you can find opportunities to create quality contact,
Mhm.
that is one way to do so. So as an example, we now see many companies moving into shadow boards. So we have a board of directors, which may be senior, older person heavy, and younger people are brought into the boards to shadow the older board of directors people. So that is an example of bringing a young person into a group that they may be excluded in some cases, and the quality of contact there can be quite strong. Another one, which we mentioned earlier, which would be age mentoring. So a younger worker might mentor, and this is done in quite a few companies now. I'm seeing it in the pharmaceutical industry and not a lot, where a younger person might mentor an older worker on technology, and an older worker may share wisdom with a younger person on something else.
Right.
So I think, and there are many examples of this. Team formation is another,
Right,
and
absolutely.
cross training is another. So there are many organizational initiatives that stress quality of contact. So just getting together at the pub or the bar for a party
Right.
may not be quality contact.
I like these examples because they're things that you can build into organizations, inviting younger people to boards where maybe older people are sitting on it, forming teams in a way that's very diverse in terms of age and other perspectives. And it seems to me that the actual quality of the interaction is also important. So if I'm facilitating a meeting, perhaps I make sure that I'm hearing from lots of different people. It might be that the older person talks more, or the younger person talks less, or the language and vocabulary are different. And I, as a facilitator of those interactions, need to be very careful to make sure that everybody is literally speaking the same language and has the opportunity in terms of talk time as well. So the operationalization of the communication, not just the ways in which we're organizing, also are important.
That's correct. And I'm sure you know this, it's in the business literature all the time. Is it Amazon where a lot of the younger employees are actually in different meetings are asked to speak first in the meeting?
So the more junior, which tends to be related to age, but yes.
So it's the same idea in some sense, and that may be intentional about just having opinions heard from diverse groups, or it may also be intentional about age. I don't know, but it's probably the former.
Yeah.
But I think these type of initiatives are really useful, and they don't really cost much money in many cases.
Right, and the research that I'm familiar with shows that the meetings, for example, are more productive, and people feel better about their contributions and how the whole group is working. You mentioned technology as an example of some of the mentoring that can happen. I'm curious, based on what you know about this, how technology plays in this. I mean, certainly there's stereotypes around age and technology, but how does technology play both as something that can help in these circumstances and perhaps actually drive even bigger wedges in between the generations?
Let's just talk. I think the interaction between technology and training is can we go down that
Sure, absolutely.
road? So there is research, some of it rather unfortunate, what we see from the research, that older workers are often denied training. We just need to look at organizations, and we often see leadership development training at the younger age groups. We also know from some research that when a trainer knows that an individual is an older worker, they will provide less quality training and shorter training to the older individual. There's some interesting studies done on that. So I think, number one, if we could work to bust some of those stereotypes in and of itself, that would be helpful. However, older workers do train differently. And again, this is a broad generalization, but from the research, it would suggest there is a preference towards live training. There's a preference towards storytelling and training. There's a preference towards self-paced training. There's a preference towards an interactive engagement in training. So I don't think it's necessarily the technology that the older workers, again, this is a generalization, but can't necessarily handle, but it is they need to be trained in many cases in a way that is differently. So all we need to do on a given weekday afternoon, go to an Apple store near you. At least the one where in the periphery of the store are all younger people, but in the middle of the store, at the tables, I guess it's the Genius Bar, correct?
Right.
It's all older individuals training, at least where on a weekday, right, when everybody else is at school. So it's just, I think that's a perfect illustration of some of the differences.
I really appreciate what you did in your answer, which was to take a question that's based on a stereotype about technology and turn it into what I think is really more important, which is understanding how people interact with and learn, not just technology, but I think more broadly. And this gets to the point that to capture and truly benefit from diversity of any type, age being one, we really have to reflect on how people like to learn, like to engage, and we have to adjust. We in essence, as leaders, as managers, we need to become fluent in all these different ways and set up an environment where no one way is the right way. It is just a way to help people. And as somebody prior to my academic career who ran learning and development, it was very clear that you have to be very cognizant of how people learn, how they best receive new information and training to help them be successful. This has been a fascinating conversation and one that I think opens up my mind, and I hope everybody listening in, to this notion that we need to be very cognizant of how we communicate when interacting with people who are older than us or younger than us. And there are things we can do institutionally within an organization, but also in our own practices to better serve those needs. I end every one of these episodes with 3 questions. 1 I make special just for you, and then 2 that everybody else answers. Are you up for answering these?
Go for it.
So one of the areas that you study is persuasion. If you were to go into an organization and try to persuade them to implement one thing that you think would make a big difference in how folks of different generations communicate, what would you advocate for?
Who am I persuading? I always need to know who the audience is. Am I persuading the senior leadership?
Yeah, your leadership.
I would persuade them to implement initiatives to have all employees in the organization, regardless of how small or how large it is, to diversify their networks. In other words, scan your networks for, when I say networks, I mean it could be your LinkedIn network, it could be the people on your phone, it could be all the people that you feel that are in your network. Scan for diversity. Scan for age, scan for culture, scan for gender. Find opportunities around common interests that you can meet and engage with people of that are different than you, because that way you will get novel information, you'll get new information. I think at an organizational level, I know this may not be what you expected, but I think if they can create opportunities for their organization, for the organization, the people in the company to deeply engage and to be encouraged to engage with people that are not like themselves. I think that could probably have as big an impact as anything you would see in an organization. So I'm trying to go maybe deeper than you thought.
No, I think that's absolutely wonderful and important. And I like how you rooted it in everybody look at what you are doing. Look at your phone, look at your LinkedIn network, and then notice that. And as a leader, what can you do to expand those networks for the people? I think that's fantastic advice. Question number 2. Who's a communicator that you admire and why?
Indra Nooyi.
Tell me more.
You know, in business school, we always hear rock star. This
Right.
person's a rock star and that person's a rock star. I love rock and roll. I'm a big music fan, and
Right.
I think it's overused, quite
Right.
frankly, not with Indra Nooyi. The language that Indra Nooyi uses is vivid. The storytelling is audience-centric and engaging. You feel like Indra's, I will call Indra if you don't mind.
Sure.
Indra's stories are our stories. The way I've seen Indra work audiences and react and be in tune with them and engaged is fascinating. I think Indra Nooyi is one of the most authentic speakers I've ever seen. Just listen to the word choice. She'll say, oh, the Doritos, they're awesome. I mean,
Right.
you don't feel that you're speaking to someone that's reading off a script. Her body language, her ease, her articulation.
So I have seen her speak. I agree, the authenticity and the connection, and it doesn't hurt that she happens to lead a company whose products I enjoy regularly. So she is the chief executive of the PepsiCo company, and that's a very good speaker and a very good choice. Final question. What are the first three ingredients that go into a successful communication recipe?
So, as you know, or maybe don't know, I was raised just outside of Boston. So we think in terms of sports. So for those of people that don't, we'll help you out with the analogy.
Right.
So Bill Belichick, the New England Patriots, over and over and over talked about the three phases of the game: offense, defense, special teams. So there's our NFL football analogy. I feel that we need to be prepared for our offense. So I really am a systems person here. It's probably because I teach at the School of Engineering, starting with the offense, your metrics, your data, your statistics, your stories, your internal evidence, your external evidence, your hard evidence, your soft evidence. I work with the students to make sure their offense is strong, and they're generally pretty good. I think they undersell the stories. They undersell the soft evidence. They probably overdo the quantitative evidence, but we can work on that. The defense, I think, is less. In other words, by defense, I mean being ready for friction, being ready for objections. I'm sure you know the book, The Human Element.
Absolutely.
Great book. I mean, all you need to do is read that book and you could probably go right in and be ready. But I think students under-prepare for that. And I would say if you can be ready for those objections, in many cases, the defense can become the offense. So that's a big one that I work a lot on. And then the final is the sort of special sauce, the special teams for the NFL analogy, is that we then look deeply at the audience and we look at our micro level and our macro level persuasion. We look at different persuasive techniques such as loss aversion and social proof. We look into the propaganda literature with novelty. And I sort of have a checklist almost, like a checklist that we sort of go through. How could that inform the offense and the defense? So really for me, it's those three things. If someone always understands the audience, they're in tune, they're ready for Q&A, and they can prepare for those three areas, I think they're going to be in good shape.
I like the analogy in that it signals that we don't just have to focus on, or we shouldn't focus just on all the reasons why for something. And even if we're well equipped with all the data and everything, we also have to think about when our message meets the people and the resistance, hesitation, concern, and we need to be prepared for that. And I agree, many people are underprepared. And then we need to look at the tools that we have, the special tools that can help us, leveraging some of the influence tactics that you mentioned. So I like that division, and absolutely I agree that everything is predicated on understanding the audience and appreciating where they're at. Bob, this has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you giving us insight into yet another area of diversity that we need to be thinking about in our communication and organizations, particularly around age and generations. Lots of very practical and tactical bits of advice. Thank you.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure.
Thanks.